Hi, Ross. Welcome.
Thank you. This is going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, no, thanks for being here. Yeah, so I think just to get started, it would be cool to if you just sort of give us a kind of a brief overview of your career, because I know that you were personally a race car driver, right? And now you're more in the teaching, coaching space.
Yes, I was one of those kids that at the age of 5 knew what I wanted to do with my life, and I wanted to drive race cars. That was it. And fortunately, had a father that was into racing and would be at a racetrack most weekends when I wasn't playing some other sport. But uh, then work my way up through the ranks in motorsport. And I will say that I didn't have the smoothest of careers.
Okay.
um, uh, Motorsport is a weird sport. I always say that it is the only profession in the world that I know of where you compete for your job with somebody who's willing to pay to do your job. So imagine, if you were working at a company, one day you walked into the office, your boss said to you, "You can go home now. I have somebody that's willing to pay to do your job." Because that's essentially
Right.
what, yeah. So I spent a lot of years kind of struggling, but also made it up to the ranks of racing in Indy cars, which is, the highest level of racing in North America for sure. Probably a step below Formula One in many people's eyes. Um, but raced in Indy cars for a few years in uncompetitive cars. It's another kind of strange thing the sport has is unlike some sports, tennis or climbing, I think that everybody's got pretty much the same equal equipment. Well, in
Mm,
racing,
yeah.
you know, your car has a big impact on your success. So, um, but raced there and then raced in professional or raced in prototype sports cars and like the endurance racing and things like that. And, won some championships, won some races and did all that. But along the way, I learned that I love to teach other people. It's almost, I get the same thrill, enjoyment, satisfaction out of coaching somebody as I do driving myself. And so as my career transitioned as I got older and the opportunities got fewer and fewer between drives, um, that became 100% of my focus. And I actually still get into a race car every now and then right now, just to have some fun and feed that addiction. But my main addiction is coaching other people, and I love I just love helping people perform at their best. And most of the time that's in motorsport, but sometimes I've had a chance to work in some other areas as well.
Nice. Yeah, I want to get onto kind of the transferability of some of this stuff at some point in this conversation. But for now, I think it would just be good for us to understand, like, I've seen Drive to Survive. So this is my knowledge
Mhm.
of race car driving. And I was completely like not interested in it at all before that series, which I guess is similar for probably quite a few people. Um, so I had this really like I could misconceived the idea of what was in at least F1. I don't know how different it is in the other different types of competitions, but I thought, you just went round the lap a few times, lapped the race track a few times, right? But it's really like more of an endurance sport in a way, right? It's certainly it's sort of mentally and physically quite a long time frame of challenge, and I think that adds a dimension that people don't necessarily think of when they think of race car driving, which we think of as making quick decisions and being reactive. um and I didn't think it was a physical sport at all. I thought it was like skill and mind and not really at all physical. So I think, there's probably a lot of misconceptions around race car driving. So to give us a sense of like the actual challenge, like what are people going through when they get in that car and they put their foot to the pedal?
So you're not alone with your misconceptions. I think a lot of people, they hop in their their car and they drive to the supermarket or the office, and they, drive down a highway or they're through some roads and stuff like that, and think of that race car driving is very much the same. Whereas it's, as you say, I mean, it's extremely physical, especially the higher the performance of the car. Formula One drivers, IndyCar
Right.
drivers, the G forces and just the physical strength and stamina that it takes. I actually saw a video of Max Verstappen, world champion, where he was basically lying on his side with his head on a chair, with his neck
Yeah.
supporting his body weight, and he could hold that for I don't know how long, but
Crazy
race
neck
drivers.
strength stuff, right?
Yes, yes. And that's one of the areas that, at some point in time, you're going through a corner and your head weighs literally 150 pounds. And
Wow.
just holding your head up in a corner is a challenge. And you've got all these G loads pushing against your body. And through the years, it wears and tears on a driver's body. If you think about, there are times where, the G loads on your body are like 4 Gs or 5 Gs. And
I don't know what
you
that means. Can you like just, what is like someone pressing on your face? Like how does that feel?
essentially you can think about it as, yes, if your head weighs 10 pounds, that would be like it being 50 pounds.
Okay.
And so there'd be like a 50-pound weight pushing against the side of your head. And that's actually impacting your internal organs even. And
Right.
all the muscles. So, very strong core strength is super important strength wise. The vibrations and pounding on the body. I don't know. I don't know of a race car driver, especially one that's slightly older or older, that doesn't have back and neck problems, like spine problems, because
Right.
your spine has just been pounded, and the vertebrae gets beaten up, and most drivers are pretty beat up. So there's that. The heart rate has been shown that it's like a marathon runner. Your heart
Right.
rate
Okay.
is, and a lot of people go, well, that's just the adrenaline. Well, some of it probably is adrenaline a little bit, but a lot of it is just the physical demands of the strength, stamina, breathing, all of that. So it's very, very difficult from a physical perspective. Um, then you add in the mental part of it, and I don't know of too many sports where you don't get a little time out, you don't get a little break.
Mm. Yeah, like most
And
team sports, for example, you can kind of check out what, somewhat. I suppose not
yeah,
completely, but
yeah. Whereas in a race car, if you check out for half a second, uh, that's not a good thing.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's that. I would say race drivers are generally they're extremely good at processing information quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you watch closely and Drive to Survive, which has done a great job of sort of bringing the sport to more people, I think you'll see a lot of drivers where they're in communication with their team over the radio, and they're constantly making adjustments on the steering wheel. There are all these different switches that adjust how the car performs essentially, and the driver's having to make adjustments, think about what adjustments the car needs, and also the team will be giving them information, and based on that they might make some adjustments. And while that's going on, they're thinking strategically about the race. The team's feeding them information about their positioning and when to push and when not to push, when to think about pitting and that kind of thing. So there's a lot going on that the driver needs to process. And then there's a corner approaching at 170 miles an hour in front of them, and they've got to
I can't imagine
brake.
how fast that must feel. Like 70 miles per hour feels fast on the motorway. Like I can't
Yeah,
imagine what 170 feels like going around a corner or even on the straight.
yeah, and it's like anything. The more you do it, the
Yeah,
more
of course.
comfortable you get
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah.
There's a point where, yeah, you can be going whatever speed, And there's that moment where it feels like you're almost stopped, and
Right.
until another car is around you where you may be passing it or it may be passing you, and then all of a sudden there's sort of that the relativity of that, and that's when it can feel fast. uh, Ideally for a driver, you never get into that state of being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It's all kind of staying there, but at the same time, if you're not slightly overwhelmed or uncomfortable at moments in time, you're probably not pushing the limits enough.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get onto that. So what does it mean to drive well? What does it look like? What's going on in the driver's mind? And what does that feel like from a first person perspective?
That is a really great question, and I wish there was a way that we could kind of I wish we could put that on TV. Uh, but maybe that would take some of the mystique out of it. So, well, it would certainly eliminate some of the misconceptions. And actually, I just want to go back to something you touched on just briefly in the very beginning. There was we tend to think of race drivers as being daredevils. We think
Mm-hmm.
of them as being brave and they're relying on quick reflexes. And there's kind of a saying that if you're relying on your reflexes to get you around the track quickly, you're probably not going to survive long. You need to be more proactive with things. So I guess that's kind of getting to what's going on in the driver's mind. A lot of it is how much of it can you predict?
Mm.
And if you're coming up to a corner and you just react at the last second, our reactions are not fast enough to keep up with a modern race car.
So
We
how do you
cannot.
predict though and do what you need to do in the moment? Like how can you be present and predict at the same time?
I think there's. So I think some of it is pattern matching.
Okay.
Most drivers sort of they work their way up the ranks, and eventually, they're at whatever level they're at, and we'll take Formula One or IndyCar racing, where at the top levels, and the drivers at that level have seen a lot, and there are times, it's that the example or analogy I use sometimes is you're driving down a roadway, and there's an intersection up there, and out of the corner of your eye, you see some movement, but it doesn't even register consciously.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, with experience, without whatever reason, you brake and you slow down, and a car comes screaming through the intersection in front of you. And
Yeah.
somebody might be sitting in the car with you and go, well, how did you know that was going to happen? Well, you go, really, I've seen that pattern before.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things about auto racing, where it's on a circuit, on a track, is we go around and around and around and around these tracks, and the tracks stay in the same place. They don't move. Unlike rallying, where they're going down some forest road, and
Yeah.
it could be almost the first time they see it, and yet there's a pattern to that. Even it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I've seen this kind of a curve, I've seen that line of trees. So I think some of it is pattern matching. I think some of it is uh, the vision skills that a race driver relies on. Is it's I don't know. I think it's almost unusual how good it is. And there have been studies done where drivers have worn eye tracking devices so they can actually see where the driver is looking or focusing.
Yeah.
What it can't measure is peripheral vision.
Right.
And I think there's a process that drivers go through. So as you approach a corner, you you see that corner before you can physically see it. So it's kind of in your memory. I call it mental vision. It's vision it's something that you see before you can physically see it.
And is
But then
that
we
because
kind
they
of
know the track already and so they've
yes,
visualized it previously?
yes, and it's like if you do visualization, mental imagery, a driver can sit down close their eyes, and imagine driving a track. And by the way, it's been done many times with drivers where they'll put a stopwatch on and time themselves going around a track. And in real life, they get around the track in 1 minute, 42.6 seconds. And when they close their eyes and imagine driving it, they might go around the track in 1 minute, 42.3 seconds, like 3/10 of a second difference in their visualization of it. But so it's one thing to be able to do that, though, sitting down and relaxed beforehand. It's another to be able to visualize a corner as you're approaching it. So you kind of almost need to separate your mind from what am I going to do coming up, and seeing that kind of in your memory. And another is I'm still visually aware of where I'm at right now and what I need to do right now. And so
I
a
guess
driver's
do you
eye,
automate some of that, I guess, right? Like there's so much that we must automate, and it's not in our conscious mind, right? So I guess like what's in a driver's conscious mind, like in terms of actual thoughts and like that sort of like more up here cognitive processing stuff, and what's more through this imagery and through visualization and through I want to say the word intuition, but maybe that's not quite right here because they've already previewed the route in the head so many times. So it's not actually from intuition in many cases. Maybe we can get into intuition after. I don't want to introduce too many ideas here.
So you're right. I mean, you cannot, all of that is automated. Like if I sat down right now and talked to Max Verstappen and said, "Where are you looking? Where are your eyes? What's your vision doing?" He'd probably go, "I don't know." It's one of those things where a driver rarely thinks about those. Well, doesn't really think about those things in the moment. That maybe afterwards, if they're interested, they might go, "How do I do that?" But most of them don't do that. It is something that's just done subconsciously. You just do. At the conscious level, there is more, I would say, more big picture strategic thinking of in a race, because of the nature of the tires and fuel strategy and things like that. A driver needs to make some decisions on, I can really push it this lap, but my tires are going to wear more, and therefore maybe I should be a little patient now so my tires are stronger and have more grip later in the race. Or it might be the other way around, or it may be, I'm closing on that driver ahead of me right now. Now's the time to really, really push. And, I'm not saying the difference between pushing really hard and not pushing really hard is a big variance. I mean, it may be a matter of a tenth of a second or two. And if you think about all the things that a driver does over the course of driving around a circuit that might be, 3.5, 4 kilometers in length, and they're doing it in 1 minute and 42 seconds or whatever. If you think about all the thousands of things a driver may do, and another driver may do those same kind of things, but slightly differently. And the difference is separated by sometimes a thousandth of a second, sometimes a tenth of a second. And, I always ask people, right now, count to a tenth of a second. You can't do it. So those differences are super important. But at that conscious level, the driver is thinking about more of those strategic things. Should I put pressure on that driver ahead of me right now? Should I, there's a driver behind me. Should I really try to ring out a couple of really good laps right now to pull away? But I know that in doing that, I may lose some grip later on in my tires, and that may make me more vulnerable later in the race. So you're making those kinds of decisions. You're also thinking about what the car is telling you.
There's a bit of background noise, by the way. I don't know if are you touching your mic at all? Yeah. Now you've stopped. Is it this cable?
Maybe that was it.
I don't know. Yeah. Sorry. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
Carry on.
Okay.
Talking about like decision making and
yeah. So you're constantly listening to the car. You're paying attention. The car is talking to you, and so the car can handle in different ways. It can, you turn into the corner, the car doesn't turn as much as you want, so the car understeers, it plows straight ahead. Or you turn into the corner and the car turns more than you want. It's called oversteering, and where the rear tires start to lose grip. And that balance between front tire grip and rear tire grip is kind of the ultimate thing that drivers are always focused on. And that's why race teams have engineers and specialists that focus on helping develop the car, because if you can make that balance between the front grip and the rear grip of the car better,
Right.
that better, more balanced, the driver can drive it faster. And so the driver is constantly thinking about, okay, the car doesn't do this the way I want. Can I change my technique, my driving technique? And that might
Right.
be, I'm going to take my foot off the brake pedal differently. And this is one of those subtleties that most people don't realize, is people think that when you approach a corner, you pounce on the brake pedal, and then when you get to the corner, you take your foot off the brake pedal. But the subtlety and where the real magic happens technique wise between the best and the less than best is how they release their foot off of the brake pedal, how they,
Right.
and that can be it's a very deliberate thing of whether it's a slow release, a quick release, and that changes the dynamics of the car, which means that maybe even though the car isn't doing what I want, I can make it do what I want. And so then you're reporting all that information back to the engineers either during or after a session as well. So those are just some of the things that are going through the mind. And of course, then there's that competitive urge.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I'm gonna, that car in front of me, I'm gonna hunt the car down and I'm gonna destroy it. There's that, and that can be either a good thing or a bad thing, which is a whole other topic, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We'll get on to that. Um, it's kind of interesting actually what you were saying about kind of like that some of that decision making around strategy and stuff, and then some of it's more automated, um and sort of feels more like sub or unconscious, because I think we do actually have a similar thing in climbing where like when you're actually doing the moves you should be kind of like in your body just climbing, but then every now and again you need to make some kind of strategy around like where should I rest, where should I find gear, depending on the type of climbing. Some climbing's very short and you can't really think, there's no time to strategize or anything, right? It's all over in 20 seconds or whatever. But some types of climbing you kind of actually need to stop and make a plan of where you're going. um but obviously in climbing a lot of the time you can stop. There is a bit of a ticking clock in climbing because hanging around you're getting tired, right? And that's part of the strategy. How long am I going to spend here trying to decide where to go, or should I just move because I'm running out of energy? So there's a bit of a similarity there between race car
Yes.
driving and climbing. um what I'd like to ask you next is, okay, so when that race car driver, yeah, is driving really well, as a coach, how do you get them to that point, and what are some of the barriers that prevent them from being their best in a race? Like the biggest things that you have to deal with, I suppose, as a coach.
So I'd say, so there's the physical technique side of it, and then there's the mental side of it. And depending on the level of the driver, early in a driver's development, it probably has more to do with just developing physical skills.
Yeah.
But as they progress, it becomes more of the mental part of it.
Yeah.
And I'd say some of the barrier. I mean, the single biggest barrier I believe, I shouldn't have said that way, is a driver's belief, their belief and
Right.
confidence in themselves. And there are some great examples of some of the all-time greats in motorsport where they have done things that people kind of stood back and went, that can't be done, but they
Mm.
did it. And it's kind of that nobody ever told them that couldn't be done, so they just did it. And there's something
Right.
about that almost being naive that that can't be done. And so I'd say a barrier for a lot of drivers is that belief, and that and I call it's an inner belief as opposed to just confidence, because inner belief seems more deeper.
Right.
It's what I truly, truly, truly believe that I'm capable of. And that you know, you see it in athletes and performers and everything, where there's kind of there's that outside layer of confidence, but sometimes that's show, sometimes that's ego. And I think that you know, but it's truly that inner belief that ultimately makes the single biggest difference. uh, so and you know, thinking about how I coach drivers, I would say like 90% of my coaching happens before a driver ever gets on the track, where we've identified what it is they need to work on, whether it's, you know, whether it's that inner belief. And obviously me just saying, well, you need to believe in yourself,
Does not work.
you know, yeah, it's like telling a depressed person, you should just be happy, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but it's giving them reasons to believe in themselves. It's finding ways to uh, have them start to believe in themselves rather than somebody else telling them to believe in themselves, and giving them small achievable goals that, you know, some quick wins, you know, do that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's got that. Okay. Did do this. Oh, got that. And so helping a driver get to that point. And like I said, 90% of what my coaching that I do is happens before they ever get in the car. And it's working through those things. And it might be, you know, another area that's really important for a driver is their their behavioral traits. Some people, you know, their natural behavioral traits might be they're a very aggressive, dominant kind of person, and they might be very impatient at the same time. Well, you can almost guess how they're going to drive on the track.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a time and place for that. And there's a time and a place to be a little patient. I guess it's like climbing, where there is a time and a place where you've got to make the decision. I got to back off here a little bit and reserve some energy or whatever. It's the same thing with a race driver. Is there's a time and a place to be aggressive, dominant, impatient. There's the time to be a little more patient. Again, all relative. If you were really, really patient, you would never be a race driver. That's just not the nature of that person. So there's that. There's the how for a professional race driver, actually, what's interesting is how they behave in the car versus how they behave outside of the car makes a big difference. The professional race driver, you know, they have to work with sponsors, they have to work with media, they have to work with a large team around them. And, you know, that may be different from a amateur racer who's paying for all the racing themselves, and they are the engineer, they are the pit crew, they are everything, and the driver. You know, but at a professional level, the top drivers have to be almost a different person out of the car than they do in the car, because when you're in the car, nothing else matters but me. It's all about me, 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 me. Out of the car, you're part of a team,
Right.
and it has to be all about the team. And you see some drivers who are very good at making that switch, and some drivers who are not. Uh, so all of those things, and you know, I guess going to what I do coaching wise, there's a lot of we develop a lot of triggers or cues, and you know, for example, if I have a driver, this is one of my favorite examples. Some drivers are very, very analytical in their thinking, and to the point of being too analytical. They're
Yeah.
thinking about every little detail, and they're almost engineering the car while driving it, and they get so caught up in this detail and that and this and that that my cue that I use with them is drive stupid. I will just say to them, drive stupid. And that's kind of you know, it's a little bit funny, and it's like, turn your brain off and just drive. Trust the
Yes,
programming
that's
that
the
you've got in your
intuition
head.
part, right?
It is. I mean,
I guess it's intuition,
I
but
don't-
it's without unknowns in a way. Or I guess there's some unknowns, but somewhat intuition. But it's shutting off that thinking mind, isn't it? That over-analyzing thinking mind. And people often think that if you're not deciding with that over-analyzing thinking mind, then it's intuition.
and I don't know what the exact definition of intuition is, but I think some people would say that intuition is something you're born with, whereas I think it's maybe in the way you're talking about it and the way I think about it is it is something that we develop intuition over time through experience.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of like intuition in a skill that you've mastered, in intuition becomes more reliable the more you practice that thing, right? So like my intuition as a climber is going to be so much more powerful than your intuition as a climber. But
For sure.
my intuition as a race car driver is going to be awful, right? Because so it's for me, it's like all of your years of experience go into your intuition, but you can't point at the processing. You know, you can't go, I'm going to do this because this of this and this. You just feel like a drive towards a particular decision, like I'm going to let my foot off the brake in this way instead of that way. I don't know exactly why, and I don't have time to think about why, but I'm going to do it because that's what feels like the right thing to do. That's how I would characterize that. I guess it's trust as well, isn't it? It's really, it's tied right up there with trust
Yes.
and with self-belief and confidence, because you can't trust yourself to just commit to that intuitive feeling if you don't have the experience or like the memory of doing that in the past and it succeeding. Um, yeah, what have you got to say about all that?
So I was going to say, wow, you can go coach all my drivers because you just nailed it. You
I'd love
you
to.
summed it up. Yeah, because yes, you know, the intuition. I think I don't know what we're born with and what we're not born with, but certainly, you know, it's the pattern matching.
Yeah.
I think about, you know, we do what we do because we're programmed to do so. You know, the way we talk, the way we walk,
Mm,
the way you climb, the way I turn a steering wheel. I mean, we're programmed to do that. Where do we get that programming? Through lots of repetition, through probably observation of others.
yeah.
Uh, you know, there's so we've been programmed that. And if we don't do what we want, it's either we've haven't developed that right programming yet, or every now and then, because we're human, we make a mistake and we access the wrong program. We've got all these little mental programs up in our head, and every now and then we pick the wrong one. Why? Because we're human. I
Yeah.
think that's my only excuse I've got for us doing that is we're human. It's going to happen every now and then. And
Well, I guess it's
but I think
complex, you know, these things that we're trying to do. And sometimes there's lots of different um options. And it's hard to tell which is the best option, right? Especially driving when everything's happening so fast. So there's bound to be mistakes happening.
yeah, and I was thinking about that in terms of like the decisions we make, and you know you and I, if you were silly enough to take me climbing, and you would make decisions without even thinking about them, I would be looking at them going, well, what do I do now? And and but part of the reasons why part of the reason I think that you would be making those decisions is you see more, you feel more, you're more aware of the information. So you have more information to make good decisions off of than I do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
You know,
know what's relevant information, I suppose, as well, right?
good point. Yes. You know, I might be looking and I'm going to be staring at a rock, and you're going, oh, but don't you see all of that? And I'm like, actually, no, I don't.
Yeah.
And the
And
same thing,
that's the pattern recognition as well, right? There's lots
yes,
of pattern recognition in climbing, you know, the way that the holds are shaped. We then the that visual information then tells us, like which hand we should take which hold with, right? Based on the orientation of the hold and the orientation of our body. And, there's a lot of pattern recognition in climbing, but we don't really talk about it.
And I got to think, just from what I've watched about, documentaries and videos and things like this about climbing, it is uh, there are times where you can't see almost, but there's a feel. And
Yeah.
and it's the same thing with driving. Is, I always say that the vision is what gets you around the track, but it's what you feel and what you hear actually that gets you around the track quickly.
Mm.
And uh, of our senses, I don't think taste plays any role. I hope not, at least. And smell, I think of smell as something that we use to deal with problems. In the case of a car, it might be, an engine overheating or something like that.
Yeah.
But really, we rely on our vision, our kinesthetic, our feel,
Yeah.
balance, all of that. And at the auditory, we use that a lot. And
Mhm.
the best drivers are better at taking that information in. And to your point of also understanding, I can take that in, but that's irrelevant at this moment in time. So I let that go. So
Mhm.
knowing what to take in and what not to take in.
Yeah, totally. So I guess what's going on really is like there's a lot of sensory information. You need to be able to take it in. You need to be as connected to that sensory information as best as possible. You need to then process that sensory information and then act.
Yes.
You're using that sensory information and then changing your behavior based off of that and how you're using the car and everything. Um, but you were talking about it before, like it was simple to do that. And you're talking about sort of the things that get in the way when someone's driving. Now, it made me think when I was watching the Drive to Survive that isn't like one of the biggest things that gets in the way, like that desire to win. Because I mean, how can you be processing all that information and being really like super on it and focused if you've got this like if you keep thinking about winning or the finish line or your competitors or your last lap time or all of that, like do you find that actually like the competitiveness and the drive to win can actually be distracting for them?
Absolutely. And I don't know of too many race drivers, myself included, who don't love the competition side of it. Like, uh, I played sports all my life, and what I enjoy more than anything else is beating somebody else. And yet, and I would say this was a big aha moment in my life, was when I was early in my racing career. I was very focused on, I got to beat you, I got to beat you, I got to beat you. And then it was sort of, and in fact, it was a specific book that I read that really
Which
got me
book was
thinking
it?
differently. A book called Thinking Body, Dancing Mind.
Oh
And
yeah,
it's
I've
written
heard of this
by
book.
Jerry Lynch and Al Huang, I think is how you pronounce his name. It is a fantastic book. It's probably the well, for sure it is the book I've read more than any other book. It's one of those books that to this day, every now and then I'll just open up a chapter and read it again. And it talked a lot about the difference between performance and competition. And when I started to make that switch in my own way of thinking about racing, where I focus more on my own performance, my performance improved, and therefore I got a better result. But when I was super focused on the result, on beating that person, that driver, that car, whatever, my performance suffered a certain amount.
Mm.
And and therefore I didn't get the result that I was after. So being more focused on my performance rather than the result, that made a massive difference in the way I think today and the way I thought later in my racing career. I wish I had learned that earlier in my career.
Mm.
Now, I have to say that that works differently for different people. And I guess that's maybe why coaching is so interesting and why sport is so interesting, is what works for you may not work for me and vice versa. And in fact, I'm currently coaching a driver now who I dangle a lap time or a position in front of him, he will do whatever it takes to get it. And that's how he performs at his best. And yet, if I had taken that same approach with other drivers that I've coached, they might have crashed. They may have just performed poorly and not got the result. So it was one of those, I've been going down this path and trying to work with all my drivers, and I started working with this driver and going, it doesn't work with this driver. In fact, I'm going to switch it back around again. And this driver has made me a better coach because I kind of had to re-examine that. But I guess going back to your point in your question is a lot of times my job as a coach is to almost distract the driver from being hyper focused on the result and get them more focused on the act, the technique, the performance right now. It's, the next thing you need to do is brake for that corner. And the next thing you need to do is release the brakes. Next thing you need to do is you need to turn the steering wheel. And getting them focused on that. And therefore they don't have time to think about, but I got to beat that other car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do you distract them?
A lot of times, I mean, again, a lot of what we've done beforehand is there are cues. And, for example, a cue that I might use with a driver is hard initial. And that 2 words means a hard initial application of the brake pedal. And we've talked through what that looks like and what it's going to feel like and all that kind of stuff. And then one of the great things or bad things, depending on how you look at it, about motorsport is I have communication with my driver while they're driving. I can be on a radio and talk to them. So as they're
Right.
approaching that brake zone, I can just say hard initial. And that kind of triggers that little program that we have built where the driver focuses on just that. And then it might be smooth release. And that might be how they release the brakes. It might be eyes up, look ahead. And
Right.
so I have all these series of cues. And, no, am I talking to the driver every single corner all the time? No. But every now and then, if I can sense that the driver is overly focused on the wrong thing, I just get on the radio and go, eyes up, look ahead,
And how
smooth
do you
brake
focus on
release.
that? Do you see them looking around at their competitors or something, or you just see it in the way that they're driving? It's just they lose some style or fluidity or something.
Yes. So primarily the second thing, I mean, I can tell because I've been around the sport long enough that I can tell when a car is driven with that flow, with uh, purpose, but not on the ragged edge. And I can see that in the car and the dynamics of the car. There are drivers where I've worked with long enough, and I can almost tell by the angle their head is tilted. It's like they're in the try mode, and
Mm.
or they're in the just relaxed and just drive mode. And then with a lot of times when I'm coaching, there's just kind of I guess call it intuition. It's my gut says, just give the driver a little reminder of get your eyes up, look ahead. And the number of times afterwards, a driver would say, how did you know that I wasn't looking far enough ahead right then? It's like, it just seemed like it was about time to remind you of that.
That's
So
interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, you all of these like performance things are kind of interesting from a coaching perspective as well, right? But maybe we don't have to get into that.
yes, but I think it's, whether you have a coach or whether you're coaching yourself. And I
Yeah.
think, I think that's can be sort of a mindset that a person could have is, I'm focused on learning. I'm focused on improving myself. I'm focused on coaching myself. And then it's,
Mm.
well, what can I do to coach myself? Well, before I start, I think about these are the 3 things that I need to focus on. And my little cues or triggers for those are, in my case, eyes up or smooth release or whatever. And that person's kind of got them in their back pocket, and they find themselves thinking about the result of, I'm going to win this race, or I'm going to get to the top of this climb, or whatever it is. They start thinking about that. It's like, no, eyes up, look ahead, smooth release, whatever that cue is. So
Yeah,
I think,
yeah, we can use stuff like that in climbing. There's like little mantras that I often use with people I coach, and certain cues that are connected to sensory feedbacks, like maybe what does that first handhold feel like under your skin, you know, your breath, what does that feel like in your body? What does that breath sound like, and people feel more connected to certain senses, I find. So, like yeah, I even just use like a little visual cue where I like zoom into a small section of the rock and just like really see that bit of the rock. And it makes me feel like more connected visually to the rock. So yeah, it's kind of similar, I think. Um,
so
Sorry,
can
go.
I share just one of my coaching techniques is, I call them sensory input sessions.
Right.
And I will ask a driver during a practice session, all I want you to do is, I want you to go on the track and I want you to drive for 15 minutes. And all I want you to do is take in more information with your hearing. I want you to soak up more of what you hear. Okay, now for 15 minutes, I just want you to focus on everything that you can feel. Do you feel the steering wheel getting heavier or lighter as you go through the corner? Do you feel the G forces on your body and the braking and then releasing? Do you feel the G forces on their side building and releasing? Do you feel the vibration? Do you feel bumps in the track? Are there places in the track where you feel like a bump and that triggers I got to brake now, or I got to turn now? So, and then a 15-minute session of all visual, just soak up more information that you can see. And about 75%, and I haven't done the research study on this, but about 75% of the time, drivers turn their fastest lap times when they're doing one of those. And I think there's two reasons for it. One is you're giving your brain better quality information to work with. But secondly, again, it distracts them from trying. Drivers rarely ever turn their fastest lap time when they're trying really hard to go fast. It's when they kind of relax themselves. And by doing this sensory input thing, it actually kind of distracts their mind from trying so hard. And
It's interesting
to
you
what
using the word distract there, because for me, it feels like actually you're doing the opposite. You're focusing their attention in the present moment. And the trying hard is actually the distraction. So it's kind of an interesting way.
Yeah, okay, I see. Yeah, I guess I'm trying to distract them from trying so hard and get them focused on what they should be doing. But yes, I
Yeah.
see how you're.
But
Yeah.
yeah, maybe
Eh,
distract is you're shifting their attention, aren't you? You're shifting their
that's way
attention
better.
from, yeah, from like
Yes.
what they're like thinking ahead at like, oh, I gotta win, um, to like what's actually going on right now. But I really
Yes.
like this phrase you have, sensory input session.
Yes.
Because I do have like a similar thing I do with some people sometimes, but it's a bit more narrow than the senses, but it's like you climb a climb and you'll literally just you put your mind in your fingertips for the whole way up the climb or something, or you put your mind in your
Yeah.
toes to get people to connect like not just to a specific sense, but I guess you could do the same with race car driving where you just connect to maybe your hands for the whole way around or
Yes.
something like that.
Yeah.
But it's
And
quite
and
cool.
yeah, and I think you just touched on it too. Is that uh, it's I've had drivers where they'll do this auditory session and they're like, yeah, okay, didn't really make much. Then they did a kinesthetic session where they just focused on everything they could feel. And there, I was like, wow, that was their best thing. And I've had other
Yeah.
drivers, what's the other way around? I've had drivers to the point where they perform at their best when all they're doing is focusing on listening.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's like you're going out to qualify for a race. All I want you to do is just listen. Listen to the tires, listen to the air rushing past the car, listen to the engine, listen to the brake sound, and just be hyper focused on that. And I had a driver recently have an experience where they struggled at a certain track for a while, and all he did was go out and drive and focus on everything that he could hear. And and all of a sudden he says it just changed everything about his driving.
Wow.
It started being smoother. It all connected. It and he went way faster than he has ever gone before. And it was just because all he did was focus on what he could hear.
That's so cool. That's
And for another
great.
driver, the hearing part might not have worked so well for them. So it's,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
interesting. I want to touch on something you talking about before. You've mentioned it a few times, this like trying too hard. Like
Mm.
what's that actually look like? What's going on for the driver when they're like, because you'd think like trying hard is a good thing, right? And in climbing, sometimes people don't know how to try hard enough. They don't know how to put the effort in. But
Ah,
yeah, like what's going on there? Like, because obviously you want to be somewhat relaxed, but you don't want to be like ready for bed kind of relaxed.
yes. Yeah. Yes. And I, I think it's one of those things that's maybe on a graph, it's a curve where, they're not trying hard enough. They try harder, they improve, they improve, they improve, and then they keep trying too hard and they start to not improve. It gets worse.
Yeah,
And I think to me, when a driver is trying too hard, the way I think about it is their body's tensing up
yeah,
and they're trying to force the steering wheel to turn. And in doing that, the muscles in their arms are more tense and you don't get as much feedback then. I'm
yeah.
remember a friend of mine who was taking music lessons, learning to play the guitar, and he asked his instructor, how hard should I be holding the neck of the guitar? And he said, about a three out of 10. And I always thought about that as, well, that's an interesting way of thinking about it, because if you hold the guitar, I would imagine, I don't play guitar, but I would imagine that if you held a guitar tighter than that, you wouldn't have good movement of your fingers on the strings. And it's the same kind
Mm.
of thing with the steering wheel in a car. If you hold the steering wheel too tight, you tense your arms and your hands, and you're not getting the feedback that's coming back through the steering wheel. And also, I think for a lot of people, for most people, the more you tense up your body, the more likely it is that you're going to hold your breath. And you asked about barriers. I should have mentioned this earlier. One of the barriers that a lot of drivers have is they hold their breath. And of course, it's usually in the higher risk, scary areas of the track, into a big, heavy braking zone or a very, very fast corner, or in a racing situation where they've got to move out to pass another car. They hold their breath, their body tenses up, because it's kind of you hold your breath, your body tenses, or you tense your body and you hold your breath. And at that moment in time, you're not taking in the same kind of sensory input. And your brain also triggers this, we hold our breath. I always say there are two times in our life when we hold our breath: when we're underwater or when we're scared. And when we're scared, again, we tense up and our brain does not perform at its best when we're scared.
Yeah.
And so learning and programming breathing and staying relaxed, I think that's where I see too many drivers that get into that try too hard. Maybe I shouldn't be saying try hard. Maybe it should be trying too hard, because it's kind of gone over the
Mm,
top of it. And yet I've worked with drivers who, same kind of thing. They don't put enough effort into it.
mm.
Interesting story. A few years ago, I was coaching a driver at a racetrack, Road America racetrack, and he was wearing a heart rate monitor. And I was sitting in pit lane, and through telemetry, I could watch his heart rate as he drove around the track. And as I watched his heart rate tick along this graph on the screen, it got to the point where I could predict his lap time pretty
Wow.
close.
Wow.
And it was like, if his heart rate was too low, he would be slow. If his heart rate was too high, he would be slow. If his heart rate was in this little band, this little window
Yeah.
here, that's when his fastest laps happen. And it was so fascinating to see
I
how
mean,
his
that's just
performance
what
was
optimal
direct.
arousal level is in sport, right?
Yes.
That's just like what it is.
Yeah. And with the telemetry, it was like, oh, this is going to be a good lap. Oh, and this is not going to be a good lap. And so I think there's that peak in the effort, try hard graph. Not enough,
Yeah.
not enough is not going to work, and too much is not going to work. So
Yeah, I mean, I guess, connected to that, I don't know if it's the same thing. I think it's probably slightly different, but it's also just like there'll be like an optimal stress or arousal level that you
Yeah.
perform in. And like willing, so like trying hard, like that, like the will part, does that bump you into that optimal stress zone or does it bump you out of it? I guess there's is part of it. But then I think there's another part of it, which is when we like really force things and we really try too hard in this like mental way. It's not like in a physical way. It's not like so like when you're climbing, sometimes you just have to like the physical exertion of your muscles has to be like the hardest you've ever tried. Like, and I love that state in climbing where I feel like it's the hardest I've ever tried. And it's like I could not have tried any harder, but that was the best place to be in. So it's sort of a bit counter to what you've just said, but it's a very specific type of try hard, which is physical and not mental. So it's like my muscles are like at their absolute max, but mentally, I'm not forcing it in the way that I think we're describing. And I think sometimes with that, like psychological forcing, it's almost like there's it comes with a certain level of distraction as well. Because in that like mental forcing, it's almost like I don't like where I am right now. It's like you're not connected to your experience anymore. Like you want it to be different. You're forcing it to be different because I don't know if like I'm explaining this very well, but there's like a resistance to what is, like for example, like someone takes overtakes you on the track and you're like, no, and then you're like, yeah, you know, it's like you're
We could,
not connected anymore, if you know what I mean.
yeah, yeah. In racing, we call that red mist. You got the
Right,
red
okay.
mist. It's just like and yeah, for sure. Mentally, you're you're not going to perform at your best there, and uh, that connected part. I don't know if that's yeah. I'm not sure if that's something that some people can experience or even know what that means until they've actually experienced it. And I
Right.
don't know. I've worked with drivers early in their when they first start driving on a track, and everything's sort of I'm going to say mechanical. It's like, okay, do this now, do this now, do this now, do this, and it's very mechanical in terms of um, it's not it hasn't become connected. It hasn't. There's no flow to that, and I will use the phrase, you need to connect with the car. You need to become
Mm,
one with the car. And they look at me with this blank stare, like I don't know what that means.
mm,
And then it could be an hour later, it could be 3 years later. They'll come up to me and go, now I get it. it,
yeah, right.
it and it's that I think it's that connectedness that perhaps it's you connecting with the rock, it's me connecting with the car, uh, and the track. That's why we do what we do, because that's
Yeah,
that's where the
feels great.
uh, yeah. And when you say it feels great, that's like the understatement of the world, right? Or of all time. It's yeah, it's feels great to a millionth degree. It's why we do that. So um, but for somebody to say, well, just connect with it.
Yeah,
I
I mean, it's just hard to put into words, isn't it? I mean, sometimes I think, like the opposite of like forcing or trying too hard is this phrase like letting go or letting it happen. And I think sometimes like the opposite is kind of a useful way of trying to get people to understand what you're saying. I don't know if it is in this case, but like especially when you become an expert in something, you should be able to let it happen because your skills should properly just meet the challenge, right? um so like in climbing, like people often try to over control. They hesitate with every movement. They don't move fluidly. This is an example of kind of like always, not necessarily trying too hard, but also trying to control too much as well, right? Not trusting,
Yes.
not letting happen. Um, and so when we actually kind of like give into the challenge, um, that's where we want to be, right? From a performance perspective. But there's a degree of kind of trust involved in that must be really hard, especially I imagine in race car driving, but I don't know if I just think that because I don't do it.
Well, I think we both use the word trust a number of times, and I think at the core of it, that is a big part of it, and I think it's trusting at whatever level you're at currently, because I'm pretty sure if we went climbing right now, my level of trust would be I could take a step up there, whereas it'd be a whole different level for you, and maybe differently in cars. So I think, but I guess it's having enough that inner belief confidence to trust what I've got right now. And that's an area that a lot of drivers that I work with that are sort of moving up the development ladder, they, uh, they're at a point where they see other people better than them. So their natural response is, well, I don't trust myself. Well, actually, you should trust yourself at the level you're at right now, to the level you're at right now. And
Right, that's interesting. So it's almost like if they trusted themselves, they'd get round the racetrack and they do their best, but that might mean that they come fifth or something. But if they see people driving faster than them, they think they can't trust themselves because they're comparing the challenge level to if they were racing at the top of the front. If I described that right?
yes, yes, exactly. And a lot of times I've asked the driver after a race, I'll say, well, how did you perform? And they'll go, well, I finished fifth. I said, no, I don't want to know what your result was. I want to know how well did you perform? So on
Yeah,
your scale of your 100% compared to your very, very, very best, how did you perform? And they might say, that's the best I've ever performed, but I still finished fifth. Okay,
right.
you may not be happy with that result, but at least you can be satisfied with your performance. Now we need to up your performance level. Whereas somebody else might say, well, you know, I don't feel like I drove all that well today, but I finished fifth. Well,
Yeah,
that's or I didn't perform. And I've had drivers that say this, I didn't, that wasn't my best drive that I've ever had, but I won today. Well,
yeah,
that's where maybe your car was that much superior to everyone else's.
yeah, yeah,
So that's
totally.
the one other, like I said, that other mix in there that you got that thing called a car in the mix. So
Yeah,
uh,
I mean, the best performances is not the same as that's what's weird about competition, right? And I used to be a competition climber, but I'm not anymore. Um, and so the climbing I do, I don't need to sort of compare in the same way. But yeah, our best performances are not the same as the results we get, if you know what I mean. Like, uh,
absolutely, and that's a difficult disconnect, I think, for some people,
right, yeah,
because they result and performance are the same thing. And
yeah,
I think it's important, if you want to perform consistently at your best, to be able to separate those two.
yeah.
Uh,
And actually, we do have that in non-competitive climbing as well, because, we always want to get to the top of the climb. And some people, will have the mindset of, well, I did badly because I didn't get to the top, even if they gave it their best performance ever.
yeah,
And that's something that happens in climbing a lot because sort of the whether we get to the top or not, there's a real clear success failure metric, you succeed or you don't because there's this clear like that it's obvious how when the task is complete, I guess, is when you get to the top cleanly. Um so yeah, that does actually happen a lot in climbing. Yeah. So how do you help people focus more on their personal performance and sort of like the experience they've had? Because that's the interesting thing, right? Is like I imagine all these people want to race cars because it feels great, because of what we just talked about when it feels connected and like it must be really exhilarating, right, to race these cars. But then when they finish, it's like they're judging their whole experience based on their result. So how do you get people to be more connected to their experience in that way?
I wish that was easy. And for some people it really is. For some people it's just, a simple conversation of separating performance from result. And I like to use a rating system. I'll just say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well did you perform today?
Mm-hmm.
And if you start doing that on a regular basis, if I'm coaching somebody on a regular basis, then you can start to see some trends. So I like to use that, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well did you perform? On a scale of 1 to 10, how on task did you stay throughout the race? Or how focused did you stay throughout the race? On a scale of 1 to 10, how was your braking? On a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah.
So because I would say a lot of drivers are, again, because they like the metrics, they like the results. Even just putting that simple 1 to 10 rating on
Right.
things
Yeah.
helps.
It's
The At least
basic
then
but
there's a number.
effective.
Yeah. I mean, and I've worked with drivers where we do that after every single event. And at the end of the year, you see a trend.
Right.
And,
Interesting.
you might kind of see, okay, that one race, it was lower. Why? Well, then we start to think about, okay, what went on? Well, that weekend I showed up and, there was a incident in my family, a medical thing in my family. And,
Mm.
so, and that's something we haven't really talked about is, a person's state of mind,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which is has a huge impact on a person's performance. But you start to see that. Another thing that I'll do a lot is I'll just say, how much fun was that today? Or
Mm-hmm.
what did you enjoy out of this today?
Yeah.
And get them talking about, well, yeah, there was this one pass that I made that was just, it was, wow. It was a little dicey, but I made it and it just felt so good. Or, man, I'm just nailing turn 6 now. Fast
Right.
corner, I feel a G loads, like I just, and get them really talking about it. And, well, why was that fun? What did you enjoy about that feeling? And getting them so they start talking more about the experience as
Yeah.
opposed to the result. And I've had drivers where, yeah, it felt great, but it sucked that I wasn't on the podium. And
Yeah.
then it was like, yeah, but what felt great? Well, this felt great, but I didn't win.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are
Yeah.
just wired differently that way. So it's difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you can shift that wiring a bit. I guess, something that feeds right into this is motivation, right? And I guess, you know, some people are a bit more intrinsically motivated, so they like
Mm-hmm.
really love the task itself and the doing of the thing. And then some people are more motivated by the results, more extrinsically motivated. They want to see themselves on the podium. And I imagine, in race car driving, that it strikes me as that like the types of personalities attracted to it are probably people who are naturally quite extrinsically motivated. Is that a good guess or not?
I would say there's a lot that are like that.
I guess just
Um,
because it's so competitive, right? Like the whole point is to beat someone. Um, and also just because it seems like that in Drive to Survive, which is my full knowledge of race car driving.
yeah. Uh, I would say, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I have to really think about that. Is my first reaction would be, yes, you're right. The majority are like that. But then I start thinking about the number of drivers who I know or I've worked with or who do they care about the results? Yes, they do. But what they care about more than anything else is the enjoyment, the thrill, the experience.
Yeah.
And, uh, you know, I wonder how many of them, I need to think more about this one because that's a really good question. I wonder how many of them are probably intrinsically motivated and yet they believe that the world revolves around the results. So
Well,
they think
yeah,
they
and
should be more extremely, so they kind of act
yeah.
that part of it out. I don't know.
No, it's a
Um,
really good point because I think as well, like, it's so much easier to talk about results. And I think that's what's
yes.
so beneficial about a coaching relationship. You know, you just said previously, like, you asked them, how much did you enjoy it? Like, and then you ask them about their learning outcomes, right? Like, how was the breaking out 1 out of 10 or whatever? That's getting them to tune more into that. And then if you put people's attention on that, then they see more of the value of it. And they also build language around the
Yeah.
experience and the learning. Whereas a lot of the time, I think when people don't reflect on it so much, they just have the language around the results. And I see that in climbing all the time. It's, you know, we say the word send to complete a climb, and it's like, did you send your project? And it's like, no, I got to here. It's so much easier to say that, or like, yes, I did, than to say, yeah, but there was this really cool moment where like I didn't think I was going to get this hold and then I got it. And like, do you know what I mean? It's like it's hard to talk about those internal experiences and compare them. And we often don't have the language to do so. So I wonder if people are more intrinsically motivated than they think they are, but they haven't really reflected on it or have the language around it so much.
Yeah. Rarely do we watch TV during the Olympics or a race or something like that, and they're interviewing somebody who finished 21st and saying, well, did you have a good time?
Yeah.
That's not our world, right?
Yeah.
uh, so I think there might be some of that. And uh, at the same time, I mean, I know some drivers who are, it's all about how big the trophy is and how much time they got on TV afterwards and that kind of thing. And sure, there are those types of people.
And
um,
what is that? Is that ego, do you think?
for sure, sometimes it is. And this, I think, comes to us as a surprise to some people, is how the word I'm going to use is fragile. How
Mm,
fragile the ego is, or the confidence even of some world class race drivers, and
yeah,
my experience in other sports as well. They're doing it almost like I got to prove myself all the time to prove that I'm okay.
totally.
And
Yeah. I mean, you see that,
it,
I think, in Drive to Survive. Some fragile
yeah,
egos and some self-worth stuff going on, probably.
yes, there's some deep stuff going on there. And there are certain drivers who I think it's interesting how through their career you can see, you can just watch interviews on TV with them early in their career, and it's pretty fragile. Later in their career, it's more, um, they've accepted themselves. This is
Right,
who I am. I'm okay with it. And what's also interesting is I think when they do accept themselves, they are more consistent high performers.
right,
It's
yeah.
when they're questioning themselves and trying to prove themselves. Like, everything we've talked about all relates together, right? It's all that inner belief, and it's trust, and it's
Yeah,
trying hard enough but not too hard. It's all of those things. If you don't trust yourself, you probably maybe try too hard, or you're trying to prove yourself, you're going to try too hard, uh, tense up, not perform as well. And so it's, I guess, is why the mental game of racing for me and other sports, I guess, is so fascinating, because it's also what works for you doesn't necessarily work for me, and vice versa. uh,
yeah,
and I think that's maybe the question around motivation is, what motivates you? And as a coach, it's one of the things that, it's not like I have a checklist of motivation. If I was going to coach you driving a car, I wouldn't be writing down, well, what motivates Hazel here? Like I don't but as my process and my gut and my intuition along the way, I'm going to start to go, oh, well, this is what works for this driver, and this is what works for this driver. Like I said, I'm currently been working with a driver for the past 3.5 years or so, who has challenged my way of thinking as a coach, because what
Mm.
motivates him and is different than a lot of other people,
Yeah, it's
in a good
interesting.
way.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I think you can definitely change your motivations, or you can capitalize on certain motivations that, um, if you do kind of nurture those motivations, if they're the kind of motivations that allow you to perform at your best, you can put more attention on those motivations. Um, that's kind of how I've seen it in the past. It's like, yeah, okay, there's for me, like, I don't like to be externally motivated really. And I can find it to be quite dangerous sometimes, right? Because in climbing situations, you have to make risk decisions. And I don't want to make a risk decision that isn't quite right because of those external motivators. So I have to be really sure that, like, I want to be on the wall because I want to be there, not because I want to please other people or I want some kind of certain outcome or something like that. Because if I'm doing it for those reasons, I might not belong there, like I might not actually have the skill to be there. Whereas if I'm intrinsically motivated, chances are, like, my skills meet the challenge level. Because when my skills meet the challenge level, I want to be there. Um, and so that's why I like have to think a lot about separating out that those external and intrinsic motivators. And I imagine that, like, does that not come up in race car driving too, where, like, if you're too externally motivated, you might make too risky decisions on the track?
Absolutely, 100%. and, and so if I can identify what motivates that driver, I can work with that. But as a coach, and I'm sure you've been in a situation where it takes some time to learn that, because if I asked you what motivates you, you may have that, both your self-awareness, but also you're comfortable enough with being honest about it, and you may say that. I will tell you that there are a lot of drivers who, if I ask them what motivates them, what I hear from them is not what is really true, I don't think. Um, I think that
Right.
a lot of times, again, and motorsport has been a male dominated sport.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't
It,
see
it
any women
there's
doing it actually. I don't know if they are, but are they?
yes, there are women involved, and more and more every single year, and it's great. Um, but there's sort of, the stereotypical race driver sort of been this macho guy, and you know there was a time in motorsport where, first of all, coaches did not exist, because
Yeah.
you can't teach me how to drive. I was born knowing how to drive. Like that was sort of the mindset. And and then secondly, as other sports started to rely on sports psychology and other things, there are a lot of drivers like, whoa, you don't give me any of that woo woo stuff. Like, stay away from me with that. That's a bunch of garbage. And uh, I think it's becoming way more accepted now. And in fact, most high levels of the sport, most drivers have, some have worked with sports psychologists, have coaches. What's interesting is, up to the very, very highest level, like Formula One drivers, typically do not have coaches. And yet,
Really?
the people, yes, the people that they surround themselves with, the engineers, the physical trainers, they actually work as coaches. They just would never call them a coach, because there's still this little macho kind of thing of, well, if I have a coach, that means I'm not the best. Like, I need a coach.
Well,
I don't
that's
need a
so
coach.
funny. That's so weird
I
though,
mean,
because in other sports, obviously
it's
people
stupid.
work with sports psychologists and coaches and stuff. By the way, I think your thing might be rubbing again. I hear some background noise. Something might be rubbing. I don't know. It started again. Yeah, that's really funny, that attitude, because it's the same in climbing in a way. There really is this history of I don't need help, like I was born to climb.
Right.
And with physical training and with mental training, but obviously, mental training is often the thing that's neglected. And it is really interesting to me that, in climbing, you have people, our top athletes have definitely got a physical trainer and a physical coach. But they don't have a psychological coach, and there's very little knowledge around, just basic concepts in climbing. And it's this very strange phenomena. And then what you get is you get physical coaches trying to do mental coaching without really the knowledge. And I'm not sure like how well it works, honestly.
Well, and I would say I have seen examples of where it does work, where I'm not going to say the physical trainer became a mental coach, but they became that confidant, that support person that provided,
Yeah.
I guess, just somebody that the driver, in my case, the driver can be honest and open with.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of helped, but I would say that person doesn't have uh, they don't have the process, they don't have the background to kind of go deeper at all. But
Yeah.
sometimes just somebody to talk to can make a big difference
Yeah.
for an athlete.
Which I suppose in their world is like quite powerful, because I guess most people can talk to their friends, but I suppose in that world, probably everyone wants a piece of you, right? If you're some top race car driver, like who can you trust? I bet there's
Yes,
so much weird social politics and stuff.
I've seen too much of that.
Oh gosh.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Eh, but I think, yeah, for that case, I think just having somebody, there are Formula One drivers who have their personal trainer, and their personal trainer is the one person in the world that they can trust to have an open conversation with, and I think
Yeah.
that does help them. But it would be interesting to see if they had somebody that could go a level deeper with them,
Yeah.
how much of an impact that would have on their performance. So it's interesting. And fortunately, motorsport has gone from don't even think of somebody who's going to teach me how to drive to accepting coaches, to there being more of an open attitude towards it, but also more and more women getting involved in the sport. And
Yeah.
it all levels. I mean, it's fantastic to see, there's more and more women drivers, there are more and more women involved with the engineering and strategy calls. And the person who's the main strategy engineer at Red Bull Formula One is a woman, and
Right.
she's been credited. Like, so I like where motorsport is going. I will tell you that it's like at least 50 years behind what it should be.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's weird that way. But I think that's part of why there's this kind of this macho attitude of, yeah, I don't need that. Um,
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Yeah. Well, hopefully it will change, and we'll see.
well, it is changing, so
Yeah.
hopefully it'll
Yeah.
continue to change.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Totally. Same in climbing.